All right, so in this video, this is our second video on nonprofit organizations, and I'm going to talk about the kind of theoretical article by Newhouse. And it is a bit of abstract theory, but I'm going to try to bring it down to earth. It's an older paper, but I actually think it has a lot of wisdom in it, and it really helps us understand what I'm going to call a sort of complex nonprofit organization. Okay, so let's think of different kinds of organizations. And in the last video I talked about Hoosier Hills Food Bank. Okay, so let me talk about that first. Hoosier Hills Food Bank is something I would say is essentially non-complicated. All right, you are collecting food to distribute to people who need it. Right, it is a straightforward mission, and so you take what donations you have, you take what money donations you have to buy food, and you distribute that. Now you need a manager to, run the space, pay the rent, market for donations, make sure people get their tax receipts, all that kind of thing. But it's a straightforward task that doesn't require sort of a high degree of sort of formal specialized skills. You just have to be a good on the ball, good listener, good observer manager to run a food bank, right? And I'm full of admiration for what they do. A complex nonprofit, I'm defining as not a better nonprofit or a smarter nonprofit, but a complex one is one where the operation of the organization requires a lot of sort of very highly formally educated, highly skilled individuals to make it work. Newhouse's paper is about a hospital. And a hospital is an obvious example. Many of the big hospitals in the United States are nonprofit. That's why in the evenings, often if you're watching TV, you often see appeals for donations to them, right? Because they are nonprofit hospitals. Colleges, most small colleges in the United States that are not public, like IU, are independent nonprofits. So around Indiana, Earlham, DePaul, Hanover, Wabash. These are all, nonprofit organizations. And of course, arts organizations, the big arts organizations in the US, big museums, symphonies, opera companies, ballets are all nonprofit as well. And they're all complex in that they require highly specialized people to run them. A hospital needs physicians, okay? Often with a variety of different specialties, they've really got to know what they're doing. A college needs faculty who have all these different areas of specialization, from history to biology to French to physics, right? Everything in between, highly specialized stuff. And if you take, say, a museum, the only way a big museum can function is if you have a highly trained, highly sensitive curatorial staff who have typically different knowledge about different genres of art and different eras from different places. That can contribute their great knowledge and skill to sort of managing the collection, managing what's displayed, doing research on new acquisitions and things like that. So complex nonprofits like hospitals, colleges, art museums require this highly specialized staff. Okay, so what do we get from that? Well, Newhouse realizes, and I think this is very true, is that when you have a nonprofit like that, that specialized staff ends up having a lot of influence on how the organization actually runs. Okay, so in a nonprofit hospital, for example, yes, you have a managing director, yes, you have a CEO, but the physicians, because they know their stuff, have a tremendous amount of influence on decisions that are actually made about how the hospital works. Okay, in a college, yes, you need a college president, you need a college vice president, but faculty have all the specialized skills, and faculty tend to run most of the way the college actually runs. Faculty decide who to hire. Faculty decide what is the curriculum going to be. Faculty decide what students should we be admitting to our programs, right? So if I even just take, our, just SPIA, for example, all of these decisions are made by faculty. They're not made by senior administrators. They may have to approve them, but the work is actually done by faculty. In an art museum, again, curators, tremendously influential. They're going to have a big influence on what kind of art do we actually see, what kinds of things are actually presented. Okay? So this is important. This is important to know, and it's important if you're a manager of one of these things to know this is a complex organization. I don't know everything. I have to rely on the expertise of all these people, okay, to make it run. So Newhouse says, well, what's the outcome of that? Suppose you have a complex nonprofit like that, and you do have this highly specialized staff, and they do have a big influence on how decisions are made. What's the outcome we get? Well, here's what he says. He says, let's simplify matters, and an abstract model always simplifies things to try to get to the core of the issue. All right? And so he says, okay, well, let's suppose, and this seems reasonable, this highly specialized staff cares about two things. Okay? One, he's going to call quantity. They want to serve people. A college wants to have students. A hospital wants to have patients. A museum wants to have visitors. You have to have a certain number of people, coming through your door. So that is obviously, of some importance. The other thing that's important to them is what he calls quality. Okay? And when we think about quality here, what we mean is quality in the eyes of those highly trained, highly specialized employees. So for physicians in a hospital, quality is what do they think makes a quality hospital? For faculty in a college, it is what do they think represents a quality institution? For curators in an art museum, the same thing. Quality is what is work that they can be proud of, that they are proud to show their fellow curators from other museums, look at what we do, such that the museum rises in prestige and reputation. So it's quality as seen through their eyes. Okay? That's our basic setup. They care about quantity and quality. All right. So where does he go from there? He says, well, okay, because they're nonprofits, there's no, as we discussed in the last video, there's no profit motive, right? So all of these people who are making these decisions about quantity and quality, all these people who drive the decisions, they're not after profit. They do have to care that the organization doesn't go broke. So they do have to think, okay, we got to make sure we can cover our expenses. There's no point in, getting us all out of a job by having the place go bankrupt. So we need to balance our budget, but there's really not much point in getting any more revenue than that. Essentially, what we want is money so that we can do cool things. Okay? So that's how they see it. So there's no profit motive here, right? They just want to pursue quantity and quality. They got to balance the budget, but there's no point in earning extra profits. So that is the setup of Newhouse's model. Okay, now let's do some analytics. He has a couple of diagrams where you might think, what is he actually doing? And there's really only two that matter, okay? So in the first picture, he says, okay, I'm going to draw a picture here. Quality is comes with a cost, okay? So suppose I measure a quantity of service along here. That's quantity. And I'm going to measure price up here on the vertical axis. And he says, okay, for any given quality level, there's a demand curve. Okay, so he says this might be the demand curve, and I'm going to call it D1 for level 1 of quality. Okay, so essentially the lower the price you can charge people, the more customers you're going to get. Your typical downward sloping demand curve. There's also an average cost curve. What is your cost per unit, per customer served? And he says, well, let's suppose it decreases for a while and then it increases. And let's call that the average cost curve for quality level 1. All right? Average cost is cost per customer served. Well, where these two lines cross, right there, if the nonprofit did this, it would balance its budget because it would be charging a price to customers exactly equal to the average cost of customers. So this is at least feasible. They could do this, okay? and they would serve that many people. Okay? So that's the quantity they could manage if they had quality level 1. Now suppose they said, what if we chose a higher level of quality? What would happen then? Well, if it was a higher level of quality, people would be willing to pay, right? We're all willing to pay more for more quality. So let's suppose the demand curve would be higher. So my blue curve here is, I'm going to call it D2, and that's what the demand curve would be if there was a higher level of quality. People are, well, they're willing to pay more. Now, quality costs, right? So the cost curve would be different too. And so you'd have, I'm going to call this AC2, and that's the average cost of serving customers if you have that higher level of quality. And again, we can see, well, there's a spot where the budget would balance, and it's right here where the two lines cross. So you could serve quantity level 2 at a higher level of quality level 2. Now this is actually good news because it looks like, this is great, you could increase quality from level 1 to level 2 and you'd increase quantity. Well, that's got to be good, right? We're serving more people and it's a higher quality. So great. But that might not always be true. So let me do a third one. Suppose we look at a third level of quality 3, and I'm going to do this with a red line. And suppose the demand curve would look something like that, D3. So that's a very high quality now. But it's going to be very costly to do this. And so the average cost curve is very high. So there's the cost of providing quality level 3. You could still balance the budget, but actually you're going to serve very few people. So your quantity level would have to go down Q3 if you wanted to do that level of quality. Okay? So what I've shown here is that they need to balance the budget. So the average cost per customer has to equal the price they're paying. And by price here, I'm combining what people actually pay for services and tickets and so on, plus donations, okay? Let's lump it all into one. And I'm saying, well, for a bit, it looks like you could increase quality and you'd get more quantity, but then it starts to decrease again. Okay? So, that's the first figure we see in Newhouse. So, what happens then? Well, suppose I then said, okay, well, I'm going to take all these equilibria, all these possibilities, Q1, Q2, Q3, black dot, blue dot, red dot, and suppose I mapped them onto a picture. What would that look like? Okay, so here's where we get to Newhouse's second picture. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. You can always go back and check the video again. The miracle of technology here. So our second picture, it's actually our last one, is in this picture I'm going to measure, slightly different on the axes here. Now I'm going to put quantity on the horizontal axis just like before, but now I'm going to put quality on the vertical axis. Okay, so that's quality, quantity. And if you remember, if we started out, we said, well, as we increase the level of quality, we actually might be able to do even more quantity. So the relationship is positive, but ultimately it starts to bend back a bit. And I've drawn that curve purposely kind of fuzzy, just to say, okay, well, we don't know exactly what shape it's going to be, but it'll be something like this. Okay, so there's our quality-quantity trade-off. Now he says, okay, those decision makers inside the organization, where do they want to be? And so he draws what we call from economics indifference curves, but essentially they like quality and quantity. They want to be as far sort of out here as possible. And so let's suppose they choose a point like that. And that is the optimum as chosen by the inside decision makers. And it's on the part of the curve where there's a quantity-quality trade-off. And Newhouse says that's kind of where we end up. Okay, that's the end of our theory. So now we ask, what have we just learned? Like, so, right? What's important about that? What's important about it, says Newhouse, is that it would be possible to serve a higher quantity of people if we were down here. But the inside decision makers don't want to do it because they value quality, and so they'd rather be up here. There are some possible consumers of this service who would actually maybe kind of appreciate a lower quality level such that this could be affordable. But that option is not there. Okay? So, just turning off a phone call here. So, that means that there are people who are essentially not going to be served for what might seem like the strange reason that the quality is too high. And Newhouse's big point is that nonprofits can have inefficiently high levels of quality. That sounds bizarre, okay? That sounds really weird because you think, how could you be inefficiently really high quality, right? How does that happen? Well, here's the story. The story is that because nonprofits spend all the money they get, because nobody takes the profit, then effectively the cost of running the thing depends on what kind of money they can bring in for different levels of quality. And nonprofits will spend everything they get. So when somebody asks you, what is the cost of running an opera company? What is the cost of running a college? What is the cost of running a hospital? The answer is, it depends. It depends on how much money you've actually got, because people will spend that in the pursuit of quality. When people say nonprofits operate on a shoestring, even really big organizations like the Metropolitan Opera, the answer is, well, yeah, because they spend everything they get. And they choose the highest level of quality that they can get away with and still balance the budget. Okay? I remember once reading an article in the Times just a couple of years ago, and it was talking about how the Metropolitan Opera was getting in kind of trouble, and it talked about the huge amounts of money they spend on sets. They were doing a presentation of Prince Igor, and they spent all this money on this tulip field that was going to be part of the sets, like, thousands and thousands of dollars on these tulips that are used in a very short scene. And they did that because they could. Because they had enough money, right? So if they have that money, they will spend it. So they go for the highest quality they can get away with. So do colleges, okay? They pursue high quality research, and elite students may be far past the degree that actually makes sense in terms of the community. But it's what the internal decision makers want. That's what they want to pursue. The United States relies very heavily on the private sector for healthcare provision. Okay? So we have all these grand hospitals that are nonprofits here, where there's much more public sector involvement in other countries. And what does the United States get for that? It gets tremendous technology, okay? What you could almost call Cadillac healthcare, right? But it's very, very expensive. More expensive than any other country by a factor of almost 100% per person, okay? Americans have really, really expensive healthcare. It's 17% of GDP, right? That's huge. It doesn't even give us that much better health outcomes. But boy, do we have nice hospitals and lots of equipment, right? So Newhouse has this weird story, and I look forward to discussing this in our discussion section. The idea that nonprofits essentially sometimes, if prestige and quality really matter to the internal decision makers, pursue too high a level of quality. It's too expensive relative to what would actually benefit the community. Okay, so it's kind of a weird result. he suggests you wouldn't see it in the for-profit sector. Because the for-profit sector would say, well, yes, let's pursue some high-cost options, but let's also fill the bottom of the market with sort of cheap things. So a clothing company like Banana Republic will set up, Gap for mid-level consumers and Old Navy for, lower-priced goods, but they'll try to fill the whole market. But a nonprofit won't do that, okay? Because a nonprofit will be pursuing that top level of quality. Okay, so that's Newhouse's paper, and we will talk about it in class next week.